Hello and welcome to Sum It Up. I'm Joelle Martinez, President and CEO of the Latino Leadership Institute. And today's episode is One Story, Many Roots. It dives into the rich history and the intersectionality of culture, career, community, and legacy. I'm joined again by my friend and colleague, Harry Hollins. Hi, Harry.
Hi, how you doing?
Oh, I'm good because it's Summit Up Day, and you know I love
Yeah.
Summit Up Day. And we're honored to welcome as a special guest today Miguel Insuk Lovato, a powerful voice and a bridge between two communities, two histories, but hopefully what we like to amplify, a shared future. As we celebrate Asian American Native Hawaiian Pacific Islander Month, we're not just reflecting. Our hope is that we are also reframing. You see, because honoring diversity means we need to move beyond categories. These categories and boxes they've tried to put us in for far, far too long. It means lifting up layered histories and stories and identities and really honoring them as beautiful mosaic pieces that I believe is the tapestry of our diversity. Today, more than 23 Americans identify as Asian, Native Hawaiian, Pacific Islander, and more than 4% of them identify as Hispanic and Latino. And today, through Miguel's story, we will learn a little bit about this layered identity, the shared experience as a Chicano Korean American. So, Miguel, I'm just so excited to dive in today and to learn more about you and your story. Thank you so much for joining us.
Absolutely. Thank you for having me. I'm honored.
Yeah. Oh, I'm so excited. Well, I want to get started at the beginning. I want to really talk about your roots, learn about how you grew up, what it was like growing up, a Chicano, what that even means, Chicano, and love for you to share a little bit about that. But growing up in these two communities, different cultures, maybe share a little bit about that with us.
Yeah, I'd be happy to. Again, thank you for having me. I'm really truly honored. Um, well, I could spend the entire time that we have together talking about my history and my roots. Just because I am so uh, I am just reminded that my story is just deeply connected to my parents' story, and their story of their own histories, but how they came together and how ultimately I came to be. So, without going into all the details, as the case was with many of my generation who have Asian parents, my father was in the military. My father
Mhm.
was drafted during the Vietnam War, but for whatever reason, was not sent to Vietnam. He actually went to Korea and was stationed in Korea. Uh,
Mhm.
Spent the entire war years, the Vietnam War years, in Korea, and that's where he met my mother. Fell in love, and they were married out there at the U.S. Embassy
Mhm.
in Seoul, South Korea. And my mother was pregnant with me when she came here to the U.S.
Mhm.
And I was born here. My dad is a longtime Denver native, Colorado native. We have roots in Southern Colorado, and he grew up, in the Denver metro area, Elyria neighborhood. Went to Manual High School, and when the I-70 viaduct was actually built, his family was displaced, and he spent his senior year at Adams City High School in Commerce City. So when my mother came here, I grew up in the Commerce City area and
Mhm.
not too far from where my dad actually graduated from high school. And, when I think I don't know what other kids experience, but when I was a child, I just knew my parents. I didn't know anything. I didn't know that I was different or unique in any way. And it wasn't until you start interacting with friends, you start interacting with classmates, with others, that you start to understand, like, well, wait a minute, I am a little bit different, right? Or I am a little bit unique. And some of that is called out. Some of that is, you're pointed out in that way. But in other ways, you just start to notice that things are a little bit different, that other kids are calling their parents different names. I grew up calling my mother Oma. I grew up calling my father Appa. Those are the Korean words for that. And I distinctly remember like noticing that my friends didn't call their parents that. And so I remember switching and saying mom and dad because I didn't want to be different. I started noticing when my mom was walking me on the way to school that my mom was packing things for me to take to school that no other kids had. And I started noticing that I was different in that way. So I think, as I started interacting with other kids, that's when I started noticing that I had these two different cultural backgrounds that not everybody else had.
Yeah. And so not only two different cultural, Korean, Chicano, but then also kind of this third layer of navigating that in an American society and community and kind of probably not feeling like you fit into any specific area or category.
You're 100% right? So like let's say my father was Mexicano, right? And my mother went to Mexico and grew up in Mexico. It would be a completely different experience for me in that space. Growing up here in the United States, there's that added layer of just uniqueness of the United States. You add in sort of this difference or this uniqueness of that many who have roots in this part of the United States were actually once Mexicanos themselves when there was a border that was much more north of where the border is now. And so for many of our families, that border actually moved. And in an instant, all of these people who lived in this part of the world, in this region, became part of the United States. And, I do say Chicano. And I say that because my father said Chicano. And there's been I've morphed and flowed in terms of how I describe that part of my identity over the years. But I remember being a kid and saying things like, well, I'm part Mexican, I'm part Korean. And Mexicanos who were here, again, this is when I was a child, would say things like, you're not Mexican. Why would you say Mexican? You grew up, your father's from here, your parents are from here, you don't even speak Spanish. How could you call yourself Mexican? And you start to try and find that sense of identity. Well, I guess I'll just call myself Hispanic. Well, my father doesn't say Hispanic. And then you start learning about even the term Hispanic, it just didn't feel right. So while my father said Chicano, it really wasn't until I became an older teenager, getting into my college years, that I really started to want to further hone in on what that identity was. Chicano felt like the right term for me because it described not only this place of sort of being a Mexican American, but also this sense of understanding past wrongs, the history of colonization, and this was sort of beyond the years of the height of the Chicano movement, which in a lot of ways was very much centered in Colorado. And in other parts of the United States as well, but there was a very strong movement here, and so it resonated with me, and it felt like it was a term that I wanted to connect with, and so that's why I've used that term. I also use Latino as well, because I do feel like there is a shared sense. My Puerto Rican brother here, on the call, there is a tie that binds us all, right? Yeah. And so Latino is a term when I want to connect with our larger gente. And at the same time, if I want to put a finer point on who I am in terms of my identity on that side, I do say Chicano.
I love it. Miguel, I love your story. Just fascinated to hear it. And it's evident you're a product of some rich cultures. And loved you to speak about what have you learned from your cultures. And I usually don't use the word different in that way, just two rich cultures. But what did you learn? What was implanted from you from those cultures that has helped you and paved the way for where, you know, who you are and where you are today?
Yeah, that's a great question. You know, I mean, and there are uniquenesses, right, on both sides, and there are also just like some surprising similarities, you know. And when I think about like some of the similarities, and I think this is kind of what I take, both cultures are so family oriented, you know, and there's this importance of family. And I see that on both my dad's side and my mom's side. The like there's no weirdness about having a grandmother living with you, right? There's nothing weird about having someone turn 18 and they're still living at home, and they're you know, they're still part of the family. They're not getting kicked out the door right when they're 18. And you know, obviously I'm making some generalizations, you know. Now maybe not every family is like that, but I think, and as a whole, that connection to family it feels so strong in both of my sides. I think the other thing too, in terms of like those similarities, there's a very palpable recognition of the value of respect and the value of our elders. And it's ingrained in the language, you know, in both languages. The way we speak to our elders or to someone with respect, I don't see there being a parallel, an exact parallel in the English language. And in Spanish, we say usted, right? And when you're meeting someone for the first time, you want to show them their respect. In Korean, the exact same thing exists, you know, and you are speaking to someone with respect. You say hello to someone, you know, 안녕하세요 in Korean. You want to show more respect. You 안녕하십니까. You're actually moving your entire body, you know, and bowing to show them respect. It's just ingrained, and I don't feel like that's the same in our larger U.S. culture, unfortunately.
Yeah. I mean, I think we need a lot more of that. And so I think there's a lot more we can learn from that behavior. Did you ever, you know, one of the things I think about when we reflect on our childhood, you know, you're saying so much that I know resonates with both Harry and I, right? That our parents were influential in helping us understand the power of our identity and the importance of holding on to culture and the importance of holding on to, you know, to those traditions. So I'm just curious, you know, how have you maintained those, and what do you do to kind of pay forward all the lessons you learned from your parents about the importance of tradition and culture and values?
Wow, that's a really good question, and I think it hits that rubber hits the road for me with my child, right? So I have a 13-year-old daughter that I want to make sure I am surrounding her with as much as I can in terms of her culture and her identity, and really just fertilizing that soil, because everyone's sort of identity journey is unique. But I want to make sure that soil is fertile, and that I'm helping her be as connected to those roots as possible. So I think from like the things that we may do at home, the food we eat, but very much the languages that we speak, you know. And I feel like, you know, I was a victim of this. My father was a victim of this. I say victim because there's a history in the United States of trying to erase identities and trying to erase cultures. And you do that by stripping them of their language. You do them for our you know, our indigenous brothers and sisters by cutting their hair and telling them that they can't speak their languages. You know, I mean, there's a whole history of that. And so how do we reclaim that? How do we embrace language? How do we relearn language, you know, that we didn't learn well as a kid? And so building up my Spanish speaking skills. That's important for me. That's a connection to those roots. Yeah. Building up my Korean speaking skills, that's important to me. And those are part of my roots. I'm also 53 years old, and so it's a lot harder for me, but that doesn't stop me. You know what I mean? I mean, even though
you know a little bit about that, trying to learn a language, right?
Yeah, it is. It's certainly, I'm not picking it up as quickly, but bringing it back to my daughter, I was so proud of my daughter because a few years ago, she asked me, she said, Dad, I'd like to take a Korean class. I'd love to learn Korean, is what she said. And man, if my child is saying that, how do I feed that fire? I mean, I'm not trying to force her. You need to go. Guess what? You're going to go to this Korean class on the weekends and you're going to learn that language. I don't want to do that. It was it filled me with joy to have her be the one asking for that. And her Korean skills are better than mine now. I mean, really, I'm asking her questions. Like, what did they just say? Or like, how do you do this? It makes me so happy. And her Spanish skills too are really, really growing. I mean, she's done a phenomenal job. I'm just so proud of her and just seeing her embracing both of those parts of culture.
Harry, you were just with your daughter. I know this resonates with you too.
Oh, no, absolutely. And everything you said about kind of the culture and the family, and first thing popped in my head, and you'll appreciate it here. And it's not just here, but when you said the respect for the elders, we talk here, and Abuelita comes down the street and it clears out. And it's unique. Like, you get off the sidewalk, you make sure there's room, it's kind of just ingrained in you. Right. Miguel, I want to, one kind of slight pivot I want to make is Joel and I know your illustrious background on the professional side. And I want to pivot a little bit to the professional side. And we know that you've been involved with youth and education and community and philanthropy. Can you speak a little bit about not only your professional background, but kind of your road on how you got there? And you have this incredible intersection of a lot of different sectors, and a little bit about your professional journey, especially for our audience that may not know you.
Yeah. I'd be happy to. So I heard you say youth, I heard you say education, I heard you say community. And then you also said philanthropy. I think out of those four, the one that was probably most serendipitous was the philanthropy route, because that wasn't in my trajectory. I wasn't looking to go into philanthropy, but I found my way into this world of this segment of the nonprofit world, right? And so I could talk a little bit about that. But to go back, I think the other pieces, young people, education, the value of youth and leaning on youth voice, those have been things that I have gravitated to, that I think have just been part of who I am for many, many years. I will credit a lot of this to the fact that, I was the first kid in my family to go to college. And there was no way I could have gotten there on my own had it not been for the support of others. And in particular, there are a number of pre-collegiate programs, but there's a pre-collegiate program that's attached to the University of Colorado that I was a part of, and was able to see, other kids who were like me, and that they were the first in their families to go off to college. And that really changed my trajectory there. It allowed me to go. But what it also allowed me to do is to eventually go to college, work for that same program, serve as like a peer mentor, and start to work with other young people who were just maybe a couple years younger than me, start tutoring them as well. Started to, I was a teaching assistant in certain courses. And I really enjoyed that feeling of trying to help make something clear when something wasn't clear. I wasn't the best student in high school. I wasn't the worst, but I was like about a 3.0 average kid, right? And seeing others who were in that same space, and I'm like, oh, we could just make this clear by unlocking this tool to help you understand physics, unlocking this tool to help you understand um, geometry, whatever it might be. So I think that piece of connecting with others and young people, that's where that seed was planted. That took me into the education world, and that took me into like wanting to be a teacher. That took me into wanting to serve on, in some volunteer capacity with organizations that are working with young people and youth. I think most of the volunteer things that I do now to this day are all centered around youth and young people in some way. Again, philanthropy was kind of not on my plan. It just sort of
The best things usually are.
and without going into all the details, I did connect with folks in philanthropy as I was looking for funding for particular programs.
Yeah.
And opportunities came up that I decided to, well, what the heck, I might as well explore it, and decided eventually to make that move into the philanthropic space. It's a different slice of philanthropy, and there's, it's not perfect, I will say that, but there's also just a lot of opportunity, and there's a lot of things that we can do in philanthropy that are just harder for those who are kind of on the ground working directly with communities.
Yeah.
And I feel like we have a responsibility to step up into that space of our own power in philanthropy to figure out how do we help move some of these larger social issues forward.
Well, I want to tap into that a little bit, because you have worked at the intersection of both philanthropy, where the money comes from to invest in programs, and also from the programmatic to make sure that these support systems are there. We're in a very buccal state in the social sector and philanthropy. Harry and I talked about this a few episodes ago, that there is a nonprofit financial crisis, that there is a risk to this important work. Because you have served in leadership, both as a board member, as someone building programs, supporting programs, and funding programs, what are you seeing? What are your insights and perspectives? What advice are you offering those both in philanthropy today, but also those in service of community today?
Yeah, and again, great questions. I love these questions. They're important. I'll take that philanthropy piece first, and then I would love to pivot to like, what do we need to be talking about with the nonprofit, partners on the ground, especially in the time that we're in right now. So philanthropy, here's one thing about philanthropy. Philanthropy, when you hear the word philanthropy, you immediately go to funding, right? And you go to dollars, as you should. It makes sense. Philanthropy is set up in a lot of ways to support the nonprofit sector and with financial support. Philanthropic organizations are actually required by the IRS to distribute a certain amount of dollars, right, every year, or a certain percentage of dollars every year to nonprofit organizations. And that's valuable. That's actually, it's vital. It's actually vital to keep the nonprofit sector alive. And there are also other tools in our bag that we can use. Other tools in the philanthropy bag. The easy tool, the easy sort of fruit to grab, I think, for philanthropy is funding. Well, how do we fund this? Well, how do we create a funding strategy that'll last for 3 to 5 years? And I'm not downing any of those things. That's important. The funding piece is vital and important, but there are other tools in the bag as well. We can sit at tables that are harder for other nonprofits to sit at. And so we have a voice there that we can, exert. We can bring people together. We have the power of convening and bringing people together. We actually have the power to help move policies forward as well. There are lines in the sand in terms of like things we can and can't do, or when we can and can't do, sort of policy work. But there's a whole lot of things that we can do up to that line in the policy world. There are just things that we can do that in philanthropy, I think we should do more of. It's important. And I'm thankful that I'm at a small family foundation now, the Don L. K Foundation, just to give, to the Don L. K's horned a little bit. We're so small. We're just not a big grant maker, but we really are leaning in on some of those other tools that we have in philanthropy.
Yeah.
The other piece is real quick is that in terms of where we're at now, there's a very much worry in the nonprofit sector, not only about the funding, right, but about saying things like DEI, diversity, equity, inclusion, when folks were unafraid and really proudly wanting to stand on those things.
Yeah.
I will just say this, and this is what I've told some folks, is that you are who you are. Your programming is what it is, and you're going to continue to do what you do, whether you call it this or you call it that. Continue to do that good work. And if certain words need to be, you want to stay away from certain words because that might put you in the crosshairs, stay away from certain words. That doesn't mean that you're programming. That doesn't mean the good work that you do on the ground has to change, but you can describe it in a way that is not going to put you in the crosshairs. I think that's the more worry. It's not like trying to erase, any of the good work, but you can describe it however is appropriate or is like safe to do right now. And you still continue to do that good work on the ground. I mean, in a lot of ways, I think of it as living under in many of our communities, have lived under oppressive regimes. And if you're going to live in that type of environment, how do you not pop your head up so that you don't, have a target on you? But you stay more grassroots, really grassroots, and doing things on the ground.
Miguel, on that point, obviously we over here at Latino Leadership Institute, we're a 501c3, but we have significant representation within the LLI familia that lead other nonprofit organizations. And love to stay on that point because we're in a time, it's a different time. In some ways it's chaotic, but what advice would you give to leaders of nonprofits on what they may or may not need to do differently than what they've done in the past? Because we're in a very unique time, at least, Joel and I talk, we have faced issues and challenges. I don't know if we face this unique combination of challenges.
Yeah.
And so I'd love if there's just guidance, advice that you could give to those leading nonprofits. Yeah.
I would say two things. One is connect with your peers, right? Who are the like-minded folks that you can, because we got it, in that sense of community and linking arms with each other, finding your peers that you can link arms with and lean on, during uncertain or difficult times. I think that's one. And two, I've been telling folks this too, try and think like them. Try and think like, and when I say them, try and think like those in power right now. What would they do next? What might be coming down the pike? I am tired of hearing, and I'm tired of myself even being surprised about, oh, this new order came out. Oh, and this just got taken away. Oh, really none of this should be a surprise. We know where they're coming from. We know that what they're going to try to attack next. Let's try and get ahead of it, because I feel like there's so many of us who are reactionary in the space of reacting to. How can we start to anticipate, okay, well, what might be coming next? I've been doing that myself. I'm not an expert at that, but I'm trying to train myself to do that myself. What might be coming so that we can prepare for that. Let's be extra cautious and careful to not put any of our communities at risk. That we have to keep our communities safe. So let's make sure that we're not unintentionally putting them in the spotlight and putting crosshairs on them.
Yeah. Miguel, I and Harry, I know we could stay here and talk about this all day, not only about your history and your career, but also this really I think, important insight that you're offering, not just those listening, but honestly to Harry and to me, because we're navigating this as leaders in this moment. Just want to amplify both things. Both things are important. We do have to anticipate with the plan. We have to think differently and act differently in this different time. But this notion of coming together in collaboration, and I'd kind of like to conclude with this, because that's where we started, is that, there's beauty in our diversity, but there's strength in community, and community defined broadly as our communities coming together, working together. I met you through one of my mentees, Joanne, who leads Asian Girls Ignite. We've talked about the struggles as they're facing as an organization, that we're all facing. So I would love for you to bring it all together as we conclude today. And, from your wisdom, from your insights, from your vision into the future, how can we come together and not just survive, but really do come out stronger? And I think what this moment is offering all of us is a catalyst to operate differently. And by differently, I mean operate in community and instead of silos, and to start breaking down those silos. So closing us out, how do you see community being our superpower?
Well, I don't know about the wisdom to share, but
oh, I do. That's just fact, my kids would say.
I certainly look to our elders and the trails that they've already blazed for us, and the lessons that they've already taught us. And when I think about even just these two cultures, the Asian community, the Latino community, we've come together in the past. We don't always remember that the farm worker strikes were actually started by the Filipino community. They were the first to strike, and they connected with Cesar Chavez. They connected with Dolores Huerta, and then they came together to make it even larger and bigger. And it wasn't until they came together that the United Farm Workers was created. There were two separate organizations, but we've seen it before, right? And we've seen where there's it wasn't yes, we should definitely come together. It was we had to kind of talk it through. They had to work it out. They had to work out the details. It wasn't like an immediate, let's come together. They had to spend time, to communicate and to talk to one another and to coordinate and figure out where the areas of overlap and where the areas of uniqueness. And at the end of the day, though, they did decide to come together, and look what it created, So we've seen it before. We see it again. Just on the Latino side of me, growing up, I've seen sort of the black and brown clashes, right? And the issues between our black brothers and sisters and our Latino brothers and sisters, and young people clashing, And there are spaces, I've seen amazing nonprofits who've been able to bring together safe spaces where we are looking at our assets and our strengths together, versus being those crabs in the barrel where we're trying to pull everybody down. I don't know the exact answer, the key, but looking at our history, we've done it before and we can do it again.
Yeah. Oh, Miguel, I know we could keep going.
I know.
There's no better way to sum it up, is that, we've done it before. It's time for us to do it again, and hopefully this time sustain that community, that collaboration. We are stronger together, and I think hopefully this conversation is just the start of many. Harry, anything before we tap out? I know this is something.
I have so much more I want to say. I know we'll run out of time, and you got me just get chills there, around kind of that theme of connecting and reaching out in peers. And Joel and I always talk about, it's once you get us in the room, different communities, at 8 a.m. in the morning, at 5 p.m. magic comes out. And I think more than ever, it's kind of getting us in the room and having some discussions. We tend to work through it. And then earlier, as you said, I think there's just some overarching cultural tributes that we all have that we can kind of connect to and can pull on. So I think it's both. But I think on that closeout, as you said, Joelle, and it's a phrase you made me think about, Miguel. It's one of my favorites from Dr. King, and it's one that's not as often used, when he said, there's powers in numbers and there's powers in unity. And he said, you need both. And that's the power if we can bring our communities together. But I think he closed it out perfectly. And it's been an absolute pleasure to talk to you. And like Joelle said, we could probably go on for another couple hours. So I hope, whether it's on Summit Up or not, that we get to follow up and continue this discussion, because it's such an important discussion.
Yeah, I 100% agree. And thank you so much for having me. I appreciate just the opportunity. Like right now, this space is locking arms with folks in my same world, right? And I appreciate this. This is great for me. And what a great place we can, like, now we're at a point in time where we can do this in this virtual room, right? Yeah. Before it was like we had to schedule that room. We can still do that. But we can also create that space in the virtual world to do that. So thank you so much. Muchísimas gracias. 정말 감사합니다. This has been wonderful for me. This has really enriched me. I appreciate it.
Thank you. Thank you, Miguel. Thank you to those who joined. And Harry, as always, it's a privilege to sum it up with you. And we'll do it again in a couple weeks. Thank you, everyone. And please honor not just this month, but every month, our Asian brothers and sisters. Thank you all so much.
Take care.
Take care, everyone.